Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Israel approves a plan to conquer Gaza City just days after Hamas agreed to a new ceasefire proposal. Meanwhile, Russia's Lavrov warns that security talks on Ukraine without Moscow are a road to nowhere as European leaders meet to discuss the war. And from a new ICE detention center in Nebraska to the White House joining TikTok, we'll discuss everything happening in the US today. Now, Israel's defense minister has approved a plan to seize Gaza City and authorized the call-up of 60,000 reservists to carry out the plan. The move comes just 2 days after Hamas agreed to a new ceasefire proposal now under review by Israel. Qatar and Egypt say the plan is nearly identical to the one Israel did previously accept, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has yet to publicly respond. Meanwhile, Gaza officials say dozens were killed in Israeli strikes on Tuesday. For more on this, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by journalist Gideon Levy. Gideon, a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. First of all, what does this mean for the state of the conflict? Is this the next phase of Operation Gideon's Chariots?
Most probably yes, unless the American president will stop it on time. Otherwise, we will face another phase of this war, which might be worse than all the others. And therefore, my expectation would be that someone would stop it. But until now, President Trump gave Israel a full green light to go on to conquer Gaza City and to push the population toward the south, which, in other words, is the beginning of a real ethnic cleansing.
And Gideon, how dangerous is this military operation for the Israeli reservists? And are there concerns from families within Israel?
There is obviously a concern. Even today there was an incident, but not much of Hamas military capability remained. So there are risks. It's a war. But I wouldn't exaggerate about it. The Israeli army is much bigger and stronger, and there's very little left from Hamas. Families are concerned and worried, and above all, people ask, what for is all this? What is the end game? Where are we aiming at? What are the goals? And the answers are not very clear.
And why is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu preparing to launch a new Gaza offensive when Hamas has now agreed to accept the ceasefire that is on the table?
An excellent question. It can be only because he's not interested in ending this war. There is no other explanation, because the Hamas claimed, and it was approved by the mediators, that they agreed to this interim deal. Netanyahu, all of a sudden, who was in favor of interim agreements, is now against them. It seems that he doesn't want to end this war. Would it be because of his political survival, or because he really believes that ending the war will be half job done, and he wants really, so to say, to finish the job, ethnic cleansing or determination of the extermination of Hamas? It stays to the viewer. But the fact is that the Israeli Prime Minister is not interested in ending the war. It's crystal clear.
So you say Israel is not interested in ending the war, but they are saying that they want the hostages released. And we know that, according to intelligence, a lot of those hostages are held in Gaza City. And this is why Israel is preparing this offensive, because they want their hostages home. And this is something that's really important to them after the October the 7th attack. So do you think that the hostages will be released if this operation is carried out, or could it be fatal for the hostages?
It cannot be anything but fatal. No hostages will be released by a military operation. We are now after 22 months of fighting, and we almost didn't release one hostage by military force. They were all released in deals, and they can be released in deals. And this operation does only one thing to the hostages. It endangers the life of the 20 remain hostages, really endangers them in a very critical way. Going to this operation means that the hostages are not the first priority of the government.
Israel's upcoming operations, as I said, will be carried out in some of the most densely populated areas of the Gaza Strip. What does this mean for the people who live there?
From one hell to the other. It means what it meant until now. Israel's aim is to evacuate them from Gaza City. Over 1 million people will be evacuated. To where exactly? And what waits them in the new place? Part of them were already evacuated once and twice and 3 times. There is no place to go in Gaza. There is no secure place to go in Gaza. It's about time to let those people stay in one place, be safe, and start to rehabilitate Gaza and rehabilitate their faiths. Moving now them like sheep from one place to the other is really criminal. I don't have any other word but criminal.
And with mounting international pressure and criticism over the humanitarian crisis we see unfold in front of us in Gaza, how much room does Israel really have to expand its offensive without risking further isolation from its allies?
The only key question here is the American administration. And as long as the American president let Israel do it, Israel can handle it. The moment that Donald Trump will want it to be ended, it will end within days. But unfortunately, until now, Donald Trump seems to let Israel green light to go on with this war. Yes, there are many condemnations from all over the world. Israel is turning into a pariah state, but Israel can handle it as long as its biggest ally, the United States, continues to support it.
And right now, what does the situation look like going forward? Because we're waiting for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to announce if he's going to back the latest ceasefire deal that Hamas has agreed to. And right now, you are in Tel Aviv, in Israel. What are many people saying there on the streets and the public? Do they want this war to end? Do they want a ceasefire deal reached? How are they feeling?
There is not one voice in Israel. There are 2 voices, mainly 2 camps. One camp who supports Netanyahu, who supports the prime minister almost blindly and automatically, and will support any decision made by Netanyahu. And the other camp is the one who fights to end this war and to release the hostages before anything else. Those 2 camps are very divided, and in the streets of Tel Aviv, there are many, many people who think that this is the last chance of the hostages, the remained hostages, to come back alive. Really the last chance. And if Netanyahu is going to miss it, I guess protests will become even stronger. But Netanyahu can continue because his political base continues to support him.
Gideon Levy, thank you so much for joining us. Elsewhere, kneecap rapper Liam Ohana, also known as Mo Chara, has faced a London court over claims he waved a Hezbollah flag at a gig last year. He insisted the case is political and meant to silence the band. For more on this, I'm joined from London by our correspondent, Stuart Smith. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us. So hundreds of supporters greeted the kneecap rapper as he arrived at court on terror charges today. Why is Liam Ohana so popular? And also, what has he been accused of?
It all dates back to November last year when he is accused of holding up a Hezbollah flag, a very distinctive yellow flag, while on stage performing at a gig. His group is known as a trio that produces music and talks in support of Palestine, and while on stage he is alleged, as well as holding up that flag, to have said "Up Hamas, up Hezbollah." The problem with that here in the UK is that Hezbollah is a terror group, which means he has now been charged with potentially supporting a prescribed terror organisation, and that means that he was then later charged in May with offences under the UK's Terror Act. He's being supported, though, because many of his supporters say this charge, as he has said himself, is political. They claim that it is an attempt to quash the voices of people in the UK who are supportive of the actions taken by groups in support of Palestine. And they, in London and in Dublin, made that known during protests throughout the day. Here in the UK, we saw Irish music played outside the courtroom, and in a brief statement to the crowd after the trial was postponed to another hearing, Leigh-Ann Gerrans came outside and supported his protesters and said that they were working together to try and increase attention on the issues in Palestine, and he thanked them for coming out to lend their support and to the cause.
And Stuart, Leigh-Ann Gerrans, as you just mentioned, says the charge is a distraction, and he's made that quite clear. What more have we heard from the rapper and also his defence team?
Yeah, they're calling it a distraction from the real story. The intention or the message being portrayed by NECAP here is that in order to try and make voices surrounding pro-Palestinian action less important, less well heard, that he is being silenced. Now, the government and prosecutors say that his issue was not with what he said necessarily, but it was the holding up of a flag that supports a proscribed terror organisation. And interestingly, in this case, we're not even getting to the point yet at which that is being discussed. The charges and currently his defence team are saying that there is a technical problem with the way that these charges were brought, that they came a day late in May after the 6-month period had elapsed for the government or for the prosecutors to press terror charges. And so now this 3-hour hearing was all about whether or not this charge was brought late, with the prosecutor saying it didn't need the permission of the Attorney General to go ahead, but the defence team saying that simply prosecutors were too late and so the judge should throw out this case.
And after 3 hours of legal arguments today, you just talked us through them, what decision was reached? And do we know if he'll actually stand trial at all?
As things stand at the moment, we don't know whether he will stand trial. His defence team is full of very experienced lawyers. One of them had supported South Africa's case at the ICJ against Israel. Another has supported WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. And so they believe that they have a case here that can be immediately thrown out because of that technicality. But the prosecution say that the Attorney General's permission was not required at the point of charging, and so is trying to convince the judge, who will make a decision in late September, that this trial should go ahead. And when it does, we'll likely hear more about the other defences that Leigh-Ann Gerrans is suggesting. For example, that he picked up the flag that was thrown on stage without knowing exactly what he was waving at the time.
Stuart Smith, thank you so much for joining us. And we can see those protests and strong show of support there for the NECAP rapper outside of a Westminster Magistrates Court today. Once again, thank you. Now, Russia's top diplomat, Sergei Lavrov, says discussing Ukraine's security without Moscow is a road to nowhere. Members of the EU Commission met today after this week's White House talks between President Trump, Zelensky and European leaders. Meanwhile, Russia claims new gains in eastern Ukraine, and Zelensky condemns overnight strikes, calling for stronger security guarantees. The Kremlin downplays any immediate Putin-Zelensky summit, even as Trump does push for talks. For more on this, I'm joined by Wolfgang Pusztai, security and political analyst. Wolfgang, thank you so much for joining me. So a lot has been going on since that Alaska summit on Friday, but we've heard from the Russian foreign minister today, Sergei Lavrov, and he says talks on Ukraine's security without Moscow are basically just a road to nowhere. Is there a growing disconnect between the White House and the Kremlin?
The Kremlin certainly tries to exploit the rift between the Europeans and the United States. The key questions that are currently debated between the Europeans and the United States is, does it make sense to pursue an immediate peace agreement before a ceasefire takes place? And how should an eventual security guarantee for Ukraine look like? And these two questions certainly need to be discussed and settled within the West, so between the United States and Europe, before they continue to negotiate with Russia, of course, with Ukraine.
And we have seen days of diplomatic negotiations involving Europe, Russia and the US. But are we back to square one with Russia asking for land and Ukraine refusing?
This depends on the position of Russia and the future position of Russia. Let me express. A ceasefire means an immediate halt of the fighting, more or less on the current contact line. There may be some land swap, as mentioned by the American president, but it's an immediate stop of fighting along the ceasefire line. On the other side, this does not mean any legal recognition of any territorial claims. If there is a peace agreement on the terms of President Putin, which means that he will take the whole 4 eastern oblasts and the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. And if this is written in a peace agreement, which is signed by Ukraine and endorsed by the United States and by the Europeans, this would endorse the change of border by force. So we would have Russia changing the border with its military might, and we would have the US and the Europeans and Ukraine accepting it. And this is very dangerous, as this could be a precedent for the many other territorial disputes all over the globe. Think about the Middle East. Think about your recent report about Palestine. Think also about Abu Musa and the free islands in the Persian Gulf, or in the Arab Gulf, depending on how you want to call it. So this is a very dangerous situation, and I think it is important that the Europeans and the Americans find a common line to freeze the conflict and not give in to Putin to sign a ceasefire, to sign a peace agreement.
And that's really interesting, because we have seen Russia has launched strikes on Ukraine overnight, killing at least 3 people. And a Russian drone has also reportedly crash-landed in Poland. Is this a clear signal Russia has no interest in a ceasefire deal or a peace agreement? And is it also concerning, as you just said to me, about the rechanging of borders within Europe?
Yes, absolutely. Russia has an interest in a peace agreement on its terms. So it would prefer to stop the fighting right now and the Ukraine to capitulate, the Ukrainians to give in. But as this will not be the case, they want to avoid the freezing of the conflict. They want to avoid a ceasefire right now at the current contact line. They want to achieve as much territorial gains as possible. And as President Trump took over in Alaska the position of Putin with no necessity for a ceasefire agreement, but to negotiate the final peace agreement, this is an extremely dangerous move. But I guess the American leadership has understood that this is probably not the best idea and could be a precedent for many other conflicts. So I guess the West will again insist in the future on a ceasefire. And they will try to force Russia to accept such a ceasefire by more serious sanctions.
And President Trump says the US is ready to directly support European security guarantees for Ukraine. Without US boots on the ground, as Donald Trump said, there won't be any. Will Russia really be deterred in any future attacks at all, or will they carry on advancing into Ukraine?
I'm pretty sure that Russia will not be deterred by any kind of European-only security guarantees. On the other side, President Trump has no intention, fortunately, no intention whatsoever to deploy American troops on the ground in Ukraine. Why, fortunately? If the conflict escalates again, and we have Americans against Russians in Ukraine, this might lead us pretty quick to a third world war. So from my point of view, better than any kind of security guarantees is to build up the Ukrainian forces so that they're able to defend their own land alone after the ceasefire. Any kind of security guarantees from the Europeans will certainly not deter Putin, as I've already said, and he will not accept them because Putin, and I understand his point of view, several times stressed that he would not accept Ukraine joining NATO. If the Europeans, the French, the British, the German, would deploy troops on the ground to Ukraine, even if it's not under the NATO umbrella, this would be something like NATO forces right on the border of Russia. And Russia is scared of this. If we talk about the NATO interventions on the Balkans, we say it was a peace operation. If you ask many Russians, they say it was an imperialist intervention. So I think it's also necessary to understand the Russian point of view.
Yes, indeed. And on the Russian point of view, President Trump has come out and said it's better if Zelensky and Putin meet without me. Are you hopeful a bilateral meeting will happen and Russia will come to the table? And if so, where could Vladimir Putin be prepared to go for this meeting?
For the time being, I think Putin has no interest in a meeting with Zelensky that would lead to a ceasefire. For Putin, it is also a little bit dangerous, as he claims that Zelensky is an illegitimate president. He claims that he is not the legitimate ruler of Ukraine. So if he would accept Zelensky right now in a meeting, this would somehow undermine his own position. But I would not entirely rule out such a meeting in order that Putin pleases Trump, so that he could say, yes, you wanted me to meet Zelensky, I've met him. Unfortunately, Zelensky does not agree with what we said in Alaska. He does not give up the Eastern Oblasts.
So there's a lot of talk at the moment that Donald Trump is playing both sides as part of diplomacy. But what do you expect Russia to do next?
I expect Russia to discuss with India about the Indian position. You know that there are secondary sanctions threatened by Donald Trump on India if the war is not ended. And I expect the Russian foreign minister to discuss tomorrow with the Indian foreign minister exactly about this, so that India continues to commit in buying Russian oil. Quite interestingly, India has procured just about 2.5% of its crude oil from Russia before the war, and now it's close to 38%. So this means the import of Russian oil by India has skyrocketed during the war. The Americans are aware of this, and this is the reason why they want to target India with secondary sanctions in order to cut the oil revenues for Russia.
And Wolfgang, just before I let you go, just a quick word on sanctions for me. The US has threatened these crippling sanctions on Russia. They never implemented them. Instead, Donald Trump met Putin in Alaska. The sanctions haven't really dented Russia to the extent that people thought they would. Will sanctions be effective if more do come in? Because we saw the UK put sanctions on Russia today.
Well, 2 points. Let me stress, a big success for President Putin in Alaska was without any doubt that Trump did not talk about sanctions or ultimatums or something like this anymore. So this was definitely a major success for Putin in Alaska. Why didn't the sanctions work for the time being? There are 2 reasons. With regard to technology, Russia was able to bypass the sanctions through third countries, especially through China, through India, and through Turkey. So Russia was still importing technology that they've used for their airplanes and especially also for their drones. And the other main reason why the sanctions didn't work is that Russia was able to shift its oil and gas exports pretty quick from Europe to countries like India and Turkey. And this is what the Americans now want to target.
Wolfgang, thank you so much for joining us, and with all your analysis and insights, we appreciate your time. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A bus carrying Afghan deportees from Iran has crashed, killing at least 76 people. Several children are among the deceased. The bus was en route to the capital city, Kabul, when it crashed and burst into flames. Dubai police have arrested 3 thieves just hours after they stole a rare pink diamond worth $25 million. The jewel had been bought from Europe by a diamond trader who was lured to a villa in Dubai by the suspects and robbed under the pretense of a fake inspection. Children who vape are 3 times more likely to become smokers. That's according to the experts from the University of York and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. The review discovered an increased risk of respiratory illness and substance abuse and suggested links to pneumonia, bronchitis, headaches, and also migraines. And finally, a new moon has been identified orbiting the planet Uranus. The tiny moon was spotted by the James Webb Space Telescope and does not have a name yet. So much is happening over in the US today, from immigration to social media. The Trump administration has announced a plan to open an ICE detention facility in Nebraska, set to hold 280 undocumented migrants. Meanwhile, joining the social media fray, the White House has launched an official TikTok account sharing President Trump's message with America's young voters. For more on this, I'm joined from Washington by our correspondent, Nick Harper. Nick, as I said there, so much happening today, but what more do we know about this latest detention center in Nebraska?
Well, Leigh-Ann, an interesting choice of location this. Nebraska is a Midwest state. It's not exactly a bustling, busy state. It's very rural in its geography. Much of it is given over to farmland. But the Republican governor of the state, Jim Pellin, has said that he is creating a new immigration detention center. He's going to turn an existing low-level prison facility that's usually used as a prison work camp to detain people who are awaiting deportation or people who are being held as their immigration cases are proceeding. He says that they'll be able to hold about 200 people, but there are plans to expand this facility so 300 people can be taken in. It's already got a catchy name, like Alligator Alcatraz down in Florida. This one's going to be called Cornhusker Clink, Cornhusker referring to the agricultural land around it. And it's going to be in the southwest of the state. Pillin says this is about keeping Nebraskans and Americans across the country safe. He's working with the Department of Homeland Security, and we've heard from the Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, who says thanks to Governor Pillin for his partnership to help remove the worst of the worst out of our country.
And Nick, what are critics saying? And we've also heard from the podcaster Joe Rogan, who's issued a warning to President Trump about ICE.
Yeah, that's right. We'll turn to Joe Rogan in just a moment, but in terms of critics, they're saying quite simply this is not needed. A facility of this nature, a facility in particular in Nebraska, is not needed. There were protesters outside the governor's office during the course of Tuesday holding up signs, one of them reading "No Nazi Nebraska." A state senator, Megan Hunt, has really warned about the transparency of all of this. She says it's happening far too quickly, really without the public being consulted. And she has called the people who are behind it horrible people and horrible organisations who are locking up, detaining and disappearing our neighbours and friends. A very interesting warning, as you mentioned there, from Joe Rogan. He's a podcaster. He endorsed Donald Trump in the 2024 election. He even had him on his show. But he has told the Trump administration that ICE raids, these immigration raids that round up people that could be deported, are freaking people out. He has said on his podcast that many people, including the president's own supporters who voted for him, thought that these raids were going to be about getting rid of gang members, but instead what they're finding is that often people within their local communities, labourers, perhaps landscapers who work on their gardens, are the type of people who are being rounded up, people who he describes as being part of the community. So a backlash there from a very public supporter of Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do remember watching that podcast. I think most of the world did ahead of Donald Trump's second term in office. But Nick, supporters insist this will help protect public safety with the so-called ICE Barbie, Kristi Noem, you mentioned her earlier, saying 1.6 million migrants have already left the country since Trump did take office. And she said he's a genius.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you think about it in terms of how this plays with the 2024 promises that Donald Trump was making, really he ran on that immigration platform. It was all about coming in to the Oval Office for a second term, launching the largest immigration raid and deportation push the country has ever seen. And now the president is having to follow through on those promises. And really, Kristi Noem is front and centre. She is holding photo opportunities every single week in a bid to show supporters who voted for Donald Trump that he is keeping his promises. In the last 24 hours, she was down on the southern border, a new initiative there to paint the border wall black because black attracts heat. So in the summer months, it'll simply be much hotter. She says that it'll therefore be a deterrent because people won't be quite so willing to climb the fence if the metal is baking hot. She says it was an idea from President Trump. But it's really that push. We've also seen the US government working with other countries who could take in some of these illegal immigrants who are being deported, third countries, including in Africa. Most recently, we've seen illegal immigrants being sent to South Sudan, Eswatini. Rwanda says they're taking 250 in. Even just today, the government of Uganda had to push back against the suggestion that it was working with the Trump administration. But Kristi Noem very much front and centre, trying to push that message that the Trump administration is doing what it said it was going to do.
And Nick, in other news, the White House has launched a TikTok account with a glowing montage of Donald Trump. Let's just take a quick look at the video now.
Every day, I wake up determined to deliver a better life for the people all across this nation. I am your voice.
And there we are, Nick. We've just seen the first official TikTok from the White House. What's the reaction been to this?
Yeah, surprisingly high production values in that video, considering some of the content on TikTok. There are 170 million American users of TikTok. The White House is now officially one of them. Donald Trump had his own personal account when he was campaigning last year, but this is the first time that the administration has had an official account. It hasn't gone down particularly well, though. As you would expect, there has been some mockery on TikTok. One user said, "I thought TikTok and the ban that the Trump administration was trying to enact was a national security threat because it's owned by the Chinese." However, this user points out, now the White House has an account, that it proves it was never about security. It was just about the Trump administration's desire to control it. And one other user, perhaps going even further, saying Trump is about to learn very quickly that TikTok hates him. There is a backlash, there is mockery. We've already seen a couple of other videos being posted up. It'll be interesting to see how much they decide to populate their account over the coming weeks and months.
Nick Harper, it's never good if TikTok hates you, but thank you so much for joining us today. Now, India's Weather Office has issued heavy rain alerts across several coastal districts after flash floods and torrential rains killed at least 4 people in western India. Floods and landslides have already claimed the lives of hundreds across India and Pakistan this monsoon season, with rains expected to continue in the coming days. Jan Kamensend-Abrumbi has the story.
Rescue workers pushed through darkness to retrieve hundreds of passengers after this monorail in Mumbai, India, stopped working amidst heavy rains, leaving some in need of treatment for suffocation.
It's been more than an hour since we were struck. The biggest problem was that there was a lot of suffocation. I was stable. A lot of ladies who are still stuck are suffering from suffocation.
Some parts of Mumbai have seen more than 800 millimeters of precipitation in the last 4 days. India is no stranger to heavy rains, seen as vital for the country's farmlands. But this year's monsoon season has also brought flash floods. At least 4 bouts of so-called cloudburst rain, a phenomenon in which areas receive sudden and fast downpours, have killed hundreds across India and Pakistan this season. Rains have been exacerbated by poor drainage systems, but torrential outbursts like these are also getting more common, analysts say, and accurately forecasting them remains almost impossible. It means that some, like Vishnu Dotte, were suddenly left scrambling to escape the flood path.
We were sleeping, and at around 1 a.m., suddenly the water entered our houses. We cared for nothing and just fled from the village. We got panicked and ran out and could not wait for anyone.
India's state of Uttar Pradesh has also been hit hard. And in India-administered Kashmir, meanwhile, rescuers were forced to airlift people to safety last week after flooding and landslides killed at least 60 people and left a further 200 missing. Back in Mumbai's surrounding state of Maharashtra, rescue efforts are ongoing.
Until now, 4 deaths have been confirmed, and there are chances of 1 person who is still missing. We will start searching once the water recedes.
As flood victims piece their lives back together, rescue workers will likely have to continue to battle the weather, as the Indian Meteorological Department warns of more heavy rain in the days to come. Jan Kamensend-Abrumbi, Al Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Air Canada flight attendants have ended their strike after reaching a tentative agreement. The days-long strike caused the cancellation of thousands of flights that stranded thousands of passengers. The airline says flights have resumed, but full restoration of operations may require 7 to 10 days. Now, America's largest television station owner, Nexstar, has agreed to acquire small viral Tegna for $6.2 billion. The deal requires government approval and will likely be greenlit under President Trump's administration that advocates looser antitrust policies. The merger will see Nexstar emerge with 265 local TV stations in around 44 states. A reminder of our top stories. Israel approves a plan to conquer Gaza City just days after Hamas agreed to a new ceasefire proposal. Meanwhile, Russia's Lavrov warns that security talks on Ukraine without Moscow are a road to nowhere as European leaders meet to discuss the war. Plus, a new ICE detention center in Nebraska, and the White House joins TikTok. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora will be coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for watching.